Onegashimasu. Welcome to my dojo. Those of you who've been watching might have seen the videos of our revamp. That's 7 weeks worth of work where we laid a new wooden floor. It is a parquet floor, and had a lot of questions about it. The questions ranging as to why would I do this, considering most people want to train on tatami or WKF style matting. We have WKF style matting anyway that will go wall to wall. So for 6 months of the year we train on that, and for 6 months we will be training on the wooden floor. Simple logic, the muscles learn to react differently on a different surface. And because there's no give in the parquet floor, the muscles learn to react faster. So it's going to be an exercise in development of muscle reaction over time, as well as a certain amount of sturdiness and hardiness in the feet and the body. You also start appreciating that you can't just fall over. We do karate, not soccer. And when you're on a hard surface, you know immediately if you're falling and you're hurting yourself, it could be the end of a real fight. So a couple of good lessons in why we want to train on a hard surface for a couple of months of the year, and why we want to train on a soft padded surface for a different skill set. Alright, as per many requests, I think there have been 2 or 3 requests for us to try and do a breakdown and diagnostic kind of video on Sanchin Kata. Please, my Sanchin Kata is going to look a bit weird, and my breathing is very, very bad because I have a nose complication. I have a very badly deviated septum, and when I do Sanchin, my face contorts. So I know there are going to be a few of you snickering at my face, and I can live with that. But please understand, it is an area where I cannot do any different because my nose is physically broken in that and has grown back that way. Let me start here. 1, 2. It's opening of our warm-ups. Big toes down, other toes up. Big toes up, toes down. 3, 4. If we break it down and we just teach ourselves to pick up that big toe, pick up that big toe, pick up that big toe. Then we do big toe down, lift the toes up, lift the toes up. This is the most basic. What you want to do is you want to get to the point where you try and big toe down and then spread your toes out and flatten them on the floor. Okay? So now with those toes flat on the floor, now you lift up that big toe, place the big toe down, lift the toes out, spread them. Your toes are going to open up, spread them down, and press them down on the floor. So this is part of our warm-up. And if you're looking on the bottom camera, if I stand, normally my foot is kind of high, medium high arch. The moment I start doing big toe, little toe, what should happen is my arch should flatten, and as I load my body and I press down on my foot, I want to get this side of my foot flattened to the ground. Okay? From the outside, when I start loading pressure in the stance, and especially when I focus on the inside of the step, see if you can get it, you should get a slight lifting on the outside, but the moment you spread your toes and you grasp the floor, we tend to use the word grasp because you're actually trying to place your feet as firmly on the floor as possible. Please don't do the opposite, which as a child I was told, grab the floor with your toes. So watch what happens to the arch of my foot. Grab the floor, and if I go from, you look from the top camera, when I grab the floor, and you see a lot of people doing this, what happens is you're creating this big hollow. And the simple logic is you're reducing the amount of surface area when you do that, where in actual fact we want to increase the surface area. So the first part of Sanchin Kata's training starts with warm-ups. So the moment I start in the warm-up and I start practicing this exercise, I'm working out how to spread my feet onto a larger surface area on the floor. Okay, the next thing that we work on in the warm-ups is obviously the flexibility in the ankles, and in the kicking positions. So this is often for your Mai Geri, and this is to help you with your Kansetsu Geri and Yoku Geri, etc., or Kikato Geri, heel kick. Alright, when we move into the kata, we've got to now cross the next problematic area. So, most people will not appreciate that your foot is not equal. Let me come back a bit. Let's do this. So, we're going to use the parquet. See if we can get a nice line on the parquet floor. So here's a nice line there. There's a nice tile that's straight. Now, if I line as many of my toes onto that parquet panel as possible on the front, in other words, I'm trying to get a flat line here, you'll notice that I start to push my knee further and further out. So my knee is going that way because my foot's designed to go that way. But if that's the front, you can see there's quite a big angle. And I start getting a funny angle on the foot. Alright? And that's because the foot is triangular in shape. Now, if I line the inside of my foot up, so from my big toe out to my heel, my feet will appear to be going outward. If I do the opposite and I work on the outside of the foot straight and the outside of the foot straight, it kind of looks like narrow, bigger, because it is. And that's the first premise of Sanchin Dutch, is that Sanchin Dutch, from an anatomical point of view, we want our knee to bend straight over the ankle and the foot. That's how we're built. We're not built with our legs doing this. It's not practical. So we want this position. Okay? We want this foot in an angle which is stopping the weird turnout. And we want to start spreading our toes out. So we're grasping the floor a little bit better. In terms of width, Sanchin Dutch is a stance. 1, big toes going to the corner, 45. Outsides of the feet going straight forward, parallel to the front, Heikodachi. I'm going to move backwards for the camera's sake. Heel toe in a line. Outside of the feet straight, knees bent. Basic Sanchin Dutch in terms of where the joints ought to be for anatomical precision. So 1, 2, 3. Outside of the feet, 1 foot forward, slight inward turn so the outside of the feet are definitely straight. Okay, knees bent, ankles bent. Side view. 1, 2, 3, heel toe, a little bit more, outside of the feet straight, toes grasping the floor, knees bent, knees going over the toes. Okay? So, just starting at the toes, going up through into the ankle and now onto the knee, we want to make sure that the foot is moving in the direction that we are moving. And this way we're going to preserve our knee joints. The older karate instructors will probably bear me out, many of their friends and compatriots who did very, very turned in, toes in, a very massive acute turn in. A lot of them have got problems with their knees, and that is because they have stretched the ligaments on the side of the leg, and those ligaments then in turn create an instability in the knee, and you get what they call a joint laxity. And that joint laxity over time results in other injuries. So you're constantly having to condition the muscles, which when you approach later life, you're going to lose. Okay? And as such, eventually the knee is going to have problems. So what we want to do is from an early age encourage anatomical precision in how the body is meant to be used. Now, the next question is, obviously, what happens higher up in the body? So, the muscles on the inside of the legs, which are late developers in humans, we tend to develop these muscles, they tend to fill out a lot more when we become teenagers going into young adulthood. Okay, and so when you're doing karate with little children, it's impossible for them to protect their groin because they don't have the muscles. But we can teach them correct position. But then there should be none of the insanity of the heavy get-down kicks up into the groin, because immediately what a little 9-year-old is going to do is this. And immediately we're creating issues with the knees and the joints, and now they're going to have bad habits from childhood, which are going to be very hard to eradicate. So, to create stability, we now need to start to tighten the muscles in the legs, and we need to affect the position of the muscle according to the hip. So, most humans drop their hip, relax their stomach, and their buttocks protrudes backward. And this is their everyday position. Now, I'm exaggerating so that this goes out as much as possible. Obviously, the inverse of this, the extreme exaggeration, is when somebody literally compresses here maximum, curls out their back, folds their buttocks totally in. We need to find a balance between the correct position, the best self-defense position, as well as muscle balance, so that we can use muscles equally well, giving us an overall structural integrity. So we're in this position, we've got our feet pressing forward, we tighten these muscles, and the feeling should start from the toes around the legs in a spiral around the legs as we tighten and we press forward, so that we're tightening in particular the muscles on the inside of the legs. These are called your adductors, and there are quite a few of them that work together. And as we tighten that, to compensate for adductor tightening, we have to balance with abductor tightening, which is the glutes. So it's not just this, it's this plus this. It's the quads with the hamstrings. They're all working together. And we're getting a balance to try and ground us. So the back knee is bent, and the strength of your stance is created by the anchor in this back muscle. This back muscle is tight and it's balanced out with the front muscle, and you have the spiraling effect, creating the correct position for your knees. Into my hips are tucked a little bit in. There is a certain amount of compression, and then there is thoracic compression, which we spoke about in some of our other videos, where we're literally trying to pull the entire body downwards. Okay? And in doing this, what we're doing is we're shortening the space between the ribs. So the intercostal muscles are tightening and they're pulling everything down. When this happens, we can't breathe using the intercostal muscles. It means we have to breathe using the diaphragm. And some people call this belly breathing, because as you breathe now, you're pulling the diaphragm down, the organs inside your abdomen are being compressed, and that means they've got to go somewhere. Your back is a solid structure, press forward. So then you get now the moment this is down, in terms of my arm position, I'm looking at my elbow in relation to my rib cage. So the ribs are designed in all mammalia to protect the organs inside. Think about it this way. Our ribs protect our lungs and our heart, like our skull protects our brain. Those bones are there to protect it. The rest of these other organs, if they get damaged, well, we might survive, but we've got a lot of muscles. But if your heart or your lungs get damaged, essentially, it's the end of your life. Same as your brain getting damaged. So the body has been designed over time to create well-built structural defense. Now, that means blows from the side, generally, we can take. It's where the bones are at their weakest that we want to break them. So the next piece of anatomy is that down the top here is a series of 3 bones that create the breastbone. So the bone at the top fused with the next bone, fused with a tiny little bone at the bottom. And the top ribs tend to join in kind of directly onto that breastbone. But the bottom ribs come up and they end up short. and there's a large section of cartilage. So these ribs, we loosely refer to them as the floating ribs. And if you had to feel down from the center here, okay, from your solar plexus, what normal people would call it, and you run down the rib cage and you feel, you'll start feeling the rib cage. And if you start pressing on those ends of those connective points where the floating rib joins into the connective tissue, it's very, very sensitive. And even if you've got a reasonable amount of muscle, the muscle doesn't protect that particular spot because the muscles don't go over it. It's a piece of connective tissue, a piece of cartilage. And that is what we're trying to protect. That's where your elbow goes. So whenever you get told elbow and one fist from the ribs, that's the rib. Hand, shoulder. Pinky, shoulder line. Repeat both sides. Shoulders, down. Elbows in, and shoulder blades kind of pulling back. You can see immediately as I wanted to tension up, what did I do? I rotated my pelvis into place, straightened my back out. And this is the basic position of Sanchin.